Thanks to a rather okay ACT score, I was awarded the Presidential Scholarship at Boston University, meaning if I attended, I only would have been $100,000 in debt on graduating, minimum, instead of the usual $200,000. Now, my parents suggested, although they did not insist, that I go to a medium-sized local school to save some money, which in combination with working up to 3 jobs at a time and some of their help, I was able to graduate with $0 in debt total. But I sometimes wonder about the Massachusetts counterfactual. How might my life have been different with a higher class, richer network, a much better degree, but a decade or more of student debt payments? On balance, my guess is worse. Less options, less freedom, less dumb but fun choices. Of course, I guess we'll never know. One thing is for sure, when given the chance, I always recommend that people going to college just because, for a comms degree, a psychology degree, because it's cool and interesting, and not in pursuit of a professional degree like nursing, engineering, law, that they consider it a different option instead. Maybe try a community college, a boot camp, a trade school, a gap year or 10, or just a degree from Photoshop University, rather than setting themselves back 4 years of precious valuable time and tens of thousands of precious dollars for little to no guaranteed reward. And I would also argue on top of that the calculus changes a bit if you're going to a very good school, namely Ivies, or if someone else is paying for it. So if someone is paying for your 4 years, have fun. And that is, in fact, today's topic. Should someone else, namely the US government or US taxpayers, let students and former students off the hook by forgiving all federal student debts? Now, as usual, all evidence cited here can be found at our website, debatetrack.com, for a low fee of $10 a month. This fee helps to keep these lectures free for everyone. If you plan on purchasing a brief, I recommend following along with it during this lecture to familiarize yourself with the cards that you'll be using during your rounds. To all of you who subscribe, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. It means so much to me. And a note on evidence. Evidence quoted in this lecture is cut the same way as in debate rounds and therefore will omit some sections and therefore will not match the evidence exactly as it's written. Okay, let us start on background and on the resolution. The United States federal government should forgive all federal student loan debt. 2 notes on this. 1, forgiveness. This is a blanket term, meaning that student loan debt won't be reduced or terms amended or interest suspended, but rather from the perspective of the student, the obligation vanishes into thin air. 2, federal student loan debt. There's several kinds of student loan debt, the other big kind being private student loan debt, or forgiving today is only the debt issued by the federal government, not by other government levels, not from private lenders. This is, however, the vast majority of all student loan debt, 90+% is federal student loan debt. And one consideration on the resolution, is this a one-time thing? The answer, probably yes. The resolution doesn't hint at this happening again, and policy proposals from politicians like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have offered one-off forgiveness plans rather than periodic jubilees. Nevertheless, there are, of course, implications for such a drastic policy change. Give a mouse a cookie, and matriculating mice all over will expect cookies as well. Okay, let's talk about financial aid in the US. A note on these pictures first. They're all AI generated from Midjourney and other places. I recommend you don't look at any of their faces. They are terrified or terrifying, or their hands, or objects in the pictures. In fact, just don't look at the pictures at all. That would be the safest way to get through this lecture. Okay, financial aid in the US comes in several different forms. Depending on the program, money can be used for tuition, for associated costs like books and school supplies, or on housing, food, and other living expenses, which can often be as much or more than the actual tuition costs for students going to school full-time, who may not have other income to support themselves. So first are grants, then scholarships, then loans. We'll talk about each in turn. Grants are monies given to students that don't need to be repaid. You get the money, use it for school, finished. They're typically need-based, given to students with less family income. Some of the more popular ones are Pell Grants. These are the largest U.S. government grant program for students. About $4,500 on average, given to about 6 million low-income students annually, with the amount mostly determined by family income and cost of school attendance. FSEOG grants are similar to Pell Grants, but for students who need additional help. And Teach grants are given to education students who commit to several years of teaching in a high-need field after graduation. Scholarships are a form of grant. They don't need to be repaid and are typically merit-based rather than need-based, awarded to students who are good at a particular skill, for example, usually sports. But there are scholarships for everything from music, art, writing, to community service, to identity-based scholarships for particular ethnicities or from a particular hometown. Scholarships can be given out by schools, by companies, or any organization that wants to. You could even start your own scholarship fund if you wanted to, $10 to whichever of your classmate draws you the cutest bunny, or specifically for students who demonstrate exemplary dedication to the tuba arts. Next, loans. Private loans are issued by banks or other lending companies who make money off of interest charged to borrowers. This is again, less than 10% of all the student loan debt. Most, again, are public loans, federally backed loans, which account for 92% of total student debt, according to Forbes 23. The two real common kinds are Stafford and Perkins loans. Stafford is the most common type. It can be used for tuition, fees, living expenses. Can be either subsidized, where the government pays the interest, or unsubsidized. Perkins loans are a bit less common. They're for students with exceptional financial need and are all interest subsidized. Government pays for interest. Loan companies, the Department of Education contracts with a number of private lending companies to manage loans, including handling billing, repayment, and other customer-facing tasks. And audits keep the system accountable, at least in theory. School audits provide some federal oversight from the Department of Education, largely measured by the CDR, or constant default rate. A default, in terms of a loan, is where you are unable to pay your payment. In essence, if many students are defaulting on their loans, they're unable to pay them back, it may be a sign that the school is engaging in predatory lending. They are giving out loans to anyone without checking their credit, anything like that. These schools may be subject to more oversight, won't be eligible for federal loans and grants in the future. Some of these schools also may be providing low-quality education. That's why, perhaps, the students can't pay back these loans. For-profit universities like University of Phoenix and Capella University have particularly high student default rates, with 40% of federal loan defaults being from private universities, attended by only 10% of American students. Okay, financial aid in other countries. And looking for examples from other countries who have forgiven student debt, I couldn't find any analogous examples, but a brief look at the reasons why will help to put some U.S. student loan, the whole dilemma of it, into some kind of context. So some countries that have no tuition, Denmark, Finland, Sweden, for example, although many students take out loans for living expenses. In Finland, even living expenses are covered in part by the government. Note that these are for nationals, so you would not get free tuition if you went to school in Finland. Some countries have cheap tuition. Both France and Germany average 200 to 300 euros a year in tuition and fees, although again, students may take out loans for living expenses. Again, while Germany, for example, is a very popular destination for international students, for most majors you would have to learn collegiate level German first, so it's not just a simple thing, go to Germany instead of Kansas. Some countries have a long payoff period. In Sweden, it's 25 years. Many countries, like Korea and the UK, have income-based repayments, where your maximum payments are capped at a certain amount of your income. And as we'll discuss in a bit, so does the US. In some of these income-based repayment countries, the money is automatically withdrawn from your salary. That's countries like New Zealand and Australia. And in Canada, The government pays interest on student loans for low-income citizens. In still others, student loans are forgiven after some time, so 65 years of age in the UK, or after 25 to 40 years of repayment in some Northern European countries. All right, let's look at the status quo in the US. What exactly is the student loan crisis? 44 million Americans have some student loan debt. They owe a total of $1.75 trillion in debt, which averages to about $37,000 each of loans. I know that math doesn't make sense exactly, but those numbers are both widely cited. More than half of graduate students graduate with debt. So that's Forbes 23. On the flip side, of course, about 45% of students leave school debt-free. So pretty high percent also that don't have debt. Again, 92% of all student debt is in the form of federal student loans. Fully 1/2 of outstanding federal student loans are for graduate school. That's Malkus 23, meaning people with master's and doctorate degrees, for which there are fewer students but far higher costs. This is a fairly damning fact for AF, and in my book, the most likely reason the resolution might be changed to include the word undergraduate instead of including all those graduate school loans. Note these numbers are all close, but they are approximate. Okay, to skip to the punchline, there's reasons that having student debt is bad, mostly related to finances and quality of life. None of them are surprising. Those with student loans are less likely to spend money, less likely to invest, less likely to save for retirement, less likely to get married or have a baby, less likely to go into teaching or other fields. This holds likely for many occupations that are valuable to society but aren't rewarded with money. To quote David R. Jones in CSS 22, student loan debt is in a crisis across our nation, creating financial hardships for borrowers, perpetuating generational poverty, and choking the economic potential of millions of people in our country burdened by these loans. Okay, so what's the plan to fix the student debt crisis? Several have already been enacted and several proposed. Our current topic fits, of course, into the latter category, a proposition, but we will look at both categories individually. Enacted solution, these all exist in the status quo. So NEG might therefore be wise to defend these solutions, as if they are sufficient, we don't need a plan as extreme as forgiving all student loans. So PSLF, Public Service Student Loan Forgiveness. This is a plan that forgives student loan balances to low-income public service employees who have made 10 years of qualifying student loan payments. This program helps to incentivize people to work in the public service, the public sector, despite potentially lower salaries. HEROES, Higher Education Relief Opportunities for Students Act. This act was originally used after 9/11 and the ensuing Afghanistan invasion to forgive student loans of military personnel or civilians who worked or resided in disaster areas during wars and national emergencies. Both Biden and Trump administrations invoked the HEROES Act to forgive student debt during the COVID-19 pandemic on the grounds that the entire country was effectively a disaster area, including as part of the CARES Act, the famous $1,200 check to every American program in 2020. Saving on a valuable education. So in June, the Supreme Court struck down the Biden administration's latest invocation of the HEROES Act in Biden versus Nebraska. In response, the Biden administration's Department of Education introduced the SAVE plan, an income-driven repayment plan that will forgive up to $20,000 in student loan debt per borrower, including eliminating capital interest and reducing monthly payments to $0 for anyone making $32,800 a year. And like the Scandinavian countries we've noted, forgive student loans after 20 or 25 years of payments. More than 800,000 borrowers were instantly eligible for said forgiveness and had $39 billion in cumulative loans wiped out in August. That's Ments 823. So as of recording this video, the SAVE plan, that law still stands, but it's still fairly new, and there is some chance that it could be struck down by courts. I think. I've seen references to this. There are also personal financial options on the table for borrowers who can't pay back their loans, namely bankruptcy. So we have a card from Murakami 20. Historically, it's been very, very hard to declare your student loans on a bankruptcy, but now it's getting easier. Okay, so what are some proposed solutions that haven't been put into place? One, national service for forgiveness. So forgiving student loans in exchange for national service, like military or other service, could funnel more Americans into jobs that better the nation, while giving them employment and helping them to escape the pressure of student loans at the same time. So Cohen 22 proposes some options, quote, "Such a program would naturally encourage military service, but also incorporate other programs that meet real needs. For example, environmental conservation, pre-K assistance in schools, and senior citizen companionship." Another proposed solution is to encourage students to get practical degrees worth their value on the open market. This could be done in a soft way, for example, by requiring that schools provide open and transparent information about expected salaries and future job prospects, or in a hard way, by only giving federal loans to students pursuing in-demand degrees. Such systems wouldn't prevent students from spending 10 years pursuing a PhD in metaphysics or ancient Russian poetry, but it would require costs for these degrees that don't have value on the open market to be paid out of pocket. Next, income-driven repayment. Again, a number of countries like New Zealand, Australia, and indeed now the US, as of the SAVE plan, routinely offer IDR as a way to avoid the worst effects of student loan debt by limiting monthly payments to a percentage of income, for example, 10% of your income. So if you make $1,000 a month, you cannot pay more than $100 a month towards your student loan debts. Expanding the system and making it easier for people to opt in is another method to lessen the financial burden on loan holders. Next, hold colleges accountable. We've already noted that the Department of Education holds universities to an account to a degree for poor student performance. However, given the continuing student loan crisis, it's clear that they're not doing enough. By raising the bar for schools to qualify for loans based on constant default rates or other metrics, the government can force schools to give students an education that will give them marketable skills to pay back their debt, or otherwise just not give them loans. Okay, so these four, remember, none of these are alternative plans, or these are all alternative plans, so none of them are topical. You can't run these arguments as part of your case offense. But again, like noting other countries, it just helps to put in perspective the arguments that we're going to be talking about today. So let's do that. Let's talk about the arguments. Starting, of course, with Affirmative. The U.S. is facing a student debt crisis, with 44 million Americans buried in $1.75 trillion of debt. Relieving this debt would boost the economy and decrease poverty. It would mean better families, better quality of life, and better futures for these 44 million Americans. And it would help more than others marginalized racial and social groups. Okay, first, life outcomes. Likely the largest area for AF arguments, it'll make a whole lot of people's lives a whole lot better. So let's start with college good. It's important that we justify why we are forgiving all of these debts. We have to say that college is a good thing because you shouldn't subsidize something that's bad. Like you wouldn't pay off all gambling debt, for example, that would just encourage more gambling. You pay off you forgive all federal student loan debt that will encourage people to take on more student loan debt to go to school. Orwell 23, in 2023, college is still a good investment, with degree holders out-earning non-degree holders by $1 million throughout their lifetimes. And Nad Warney 22 talks about life outcomes, quote, "A host of other benefits have been linked with higher education, including an increased likelihood of civic participation, lower infant mortality rates, better maternal health, and a decreased likelihood of being unhoused or experiencing food insecurity, among other things," end quote. Also, families. 15% of people with student loan debt put off getting married or having a child. That's Gawuga 23, with 81% putting off some kind of key life milestone. And they list in that card quite a few of those key life milestones that are put out. But this family argument could tie into things about population collapse. Some people are concerned about this, or potentially concerned about this, the impact that low birth rate has on society. Financial security seems kind of obvious, but it's big. Pay or forgive all federal student loan debt, and people are going to have a lot more wiggle room. What would they do with that wiggle room? So 50% of debtors would pay off other debts, 45% would save for retirement. It's Qatar and Rashid 22. Americans would pay back other debts again, save for emergencies, and invest. That's Grinstein, Weiss et al., 21. Now, this is big because given that over half of Americans could not come up with $1,000 for an emergency response, given that more than half of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, financial security would lead to a huge number of quality of life, knock-on effects, and probably a lot of other societal effects as well, from medical to education to infant mortality, to mobility, domestic violence, all kinds of things. Okay. Those are life outcomes. It's great. Tens of millions of Americans will have considerably better lives, but that may not be enough for most judges. So how about the country overall? For the economy, paying off all or forgiving all student loans will boost consumption growth. People will spend more money. It will boost the economy by $1 trillion over 10 years, creating 1.5 million new jobs a year. Fulwiler et al. 18 with minimal inflationary effects. Fulwiler et al. 18 talks about this minimal inflation, but Stiglitz 22 says there's potentially negative inflation. The inflation argument is one of Neg's key economics arguments, so I would recommend adding a block to your case somewhere with these anti-inflation sources, especially if you are running the economy. Okay, poverty. Student debt increases poverty across the nation, CSS 22, so the plan will decrease poverty. Relief helps poor more than the rich, according to Eaton et al. 21. Why? Because the rich don't need to take out loans to go to school. This is a great card. The source is a sociology study that purports to correct the issues found in most student debt analyses, which say that blanket student loan forgiveness is regressive. You don't need to use this card necessarily, but understanding this card will put you in a great place to run some great defense. So the impacts. So forgiving debt will help lessen poverty effects. This happens because poor people can't pay off their loans. They default on the loans. This leads to bad credit scores. This leads to the subsequent inability to buy a house and to get credit for other purposes. That's McCarthy and Rodriguez 22. And last, this is a kind of an answer to regression. That's how I have it categorized in the brief from Brunig 19. Many measures vastly underestimate the amount of money of debt held by low-income people. These low-income people being students living with their parents, who get assigned, their parents get assigned the children's debt by most common measures of student loan debt forgiveness. Again, a great economics study to understand to set you up for a great defense. Okay, so it will help people's lives, it will help the country, particularly it will help disadvantaged groups. We start with racial equity. Minorities, especially black borrowers and older borrowers, are more likely to default. That's Streeter 22. This perpetuates the cycle of poverty and leads to Social Security withholdings. That's Westein and Leo 23, averaging $2,500 a year in withholdings. Student loan forgiveness would lead to better credit, better home ownership, more financial stability, greater job satisfaction, and more family stability for Black Americans. Here is Sharon Chenier et al. 20, quote, "The relative gains for Black borrowers are much larger, and the greater proportion of Black borrowers means that Black wealth overall would experience more growth as a result," end quote. One of the many impacts of this would be more Black teachers. They're more likely to go into the teaching profession instead of higher paying jobs that will help them pay off their loans. Fidman 19 also lists tons of impacts of having more Black and minority teachers. Great impact card. Next, women. Women hold 2/3 of student loan debt. Although they graduate with similar debt loads, they make less money, in part due to the gender wage gap, so they also have a harder time paying it back. Disabled debtors, they have similar levels of debt when graduating, but worse job prospects. So they are twice as likely as non-disabled people to land part-time rather than full-time positions. Google 23. Finally, non-graduates, they have a default rate 3 times higher than graduates. They have all of the issues of having student debt, but none of the upside of having the degree. It's Nodwarny and Lombardo, 23. This is likely also partly a correlation, because those who can't finish college are more likely to be poor, have disabilities that prevent them from finishing, extenuating circumstances with their families, etc. Okay. That is your F argument. Why should the federal government forgive all federal student loan debt? Next on neg, which I really think is overpowered in this topic. Forgiving all student loan debt is a great tagline and great for getting votes, but a bad policy. The $1.6 trillion it would cost would mostly be funneled to the upper and middle classes, more than half of it going to those with graduate degrees like doctors and lawyers, harming the economy for all 340 million Americans while creating a palpably unfair incentive structure that will only breed worse financial decisions in the future. Let's start with college being bad. Again, exactly the opposite reason from the AF argument. If indeed college is bad, we should not be subsidizing it. One reason is that there is a student glut. We tell all students, you should go to college. College is the way to a better life. That's what we tell everyone, but it's just not true. Too many students are being pushed into college, according to Riley 22, but what's good for some individuals may not be good for all individuals. Quote, economists call it the fallacy of composition, which is the assumption that what's true for members of a group must also be true for the group as a whole. To use a popular example, it's true that if someone stands up in a football stadium, that person will be able to see better. But it's not true that if everyone stands up, everyone will have a better view. So, college shouldn't be for everyone. In terms of investment, it is a bad investment. Degrees have similar costs, but with wildly different ROIs. Same holds for many schools. Some schools are a good investment. Most are not. Some degrees are a good investment. Most are not. It's Bernard 19. This holds especially true, according to Shell 18, for low and middle income families. Quote, for those born into poverty, the results were far less impressive. College graduates born poor earned an average only slightly more than did high school graduates born middle class. Next, classical liberal values like free speech and critical thought are under attack, being replaced by Orwellian, DEI, and anti-racism initiatives. This is Binenberg 23. So the idea is, the Russian Bolsheviks scapegoated the upper classes, and Maoists scapegoated intellectuals, and now the woke, who have taken over the universities, are scapegoating white men as a problem with society. Now, while I think a woke colleges are ruining America argument would be laughed out of most debate rounds, I imagine it could get some traction in the right circuit, so if you're pretty sure your judge loves Fox News, maybe throw this one in. Lastly, for why college is bad, is it will lower the quality of school. People will choose lower quality schools because their discount compared to high quality schools will be even bigger. It's Jacobson 822. A lot of great writing from Jacobson. Next, regression. So this is not a progressive policy that helps poor and disadvantaged people. It is a regressive policy that helps advantaged and rich people. So Looney 23 says that this policy for giving all student loan debt helps well-educated, wealthier, whiter Americans. Young 22 says it's really just a ploy to buy votes from the middle class, and in fact, that's who the money goes to, the middle class. Cockrell 22, or Cockrell 20, this plan for giving all debt mostly benefits high earners. And we've touched on this, but again, I think this is one of the best arguments for neg, is that a lot of the money is going to graduate students. 80% of it, in fact, would go to graduate students, those with master's degrees and PhDs and doctorate degrees under IDR. So under a direct forgiveness, I don't know exactly what the number is, but it's somewhere between 50 and 80% of all the money would go to graduate students. And part of that is because while 50% of the debt is held by people with graduate degrees, the interest payments also add up, compound over time, and so that makes the number much higher. Okay, next, the economy. So these are real big obvious ones. The plan will cost $1.6 trillion, Looney 23, larger than the cumulative sums of several anti-poverty programs over decades. Quote, forgiving all student loan debt would be a larger transfer than the amounts the nation has spent over the past 20 years on unemployment insurance, larger than the amount it has spent on the earned income tax credit, and larger than the amount it has spent on food stamps, end quote. Prices also will go up for universities if we give all this money out. So school side, forgiveness will inflate the cost of tuition as institutions can charge more, that's Young 22. And consumer side, there will be little incentive to shop around, according to Cardin 19. Quote, first, the prospect of student debt cancellation encourages us to finance the entire thing with borrowed money. Why pay now or go to the trouble of trying to earn scholarships if we can borrow on the cheap and have a reasonable expectation that taxpayers will ultimately be left with the bill? Second, why should we be price-sensitive college shoppers, and why should colleges work to contain costs if there's a good chance that it will all be paid for with other people's money? Third, we have incentives to borrow a lot of money to pursue boutique degrees with limited job prospects if, again, we know that someone else is going to pay the bill. End quote. Last, personal debt. Ditterstein et al., 523, says that borrowers whose loans were paused during COVID, the payments were paused and also the interest was suspended, just took on more debt. So it's hard to imagine that these debtors wouldn't do the same thing, just take on more debt if they had less debt. In other words, it wouldn't really solve any of their problems. It would just create more problems. Next, incentives. I think this will make a lot of intuitive sense for a lot of people. So Fullweiler et al. 18 talks about the moral hazard, the perverse incentives, where students are incentivized to borrow even more money in the future because their debt will be forgiven. So ideally, we forgive all of the debt, and then everyone kind of sobers up and wisens to the issues about debt, and they say, oh, that was great. I'll have a new shot at life. I won't make the same mistake again. I won't get out more debt. But of course, that's not what's going to happen. Really will create the wrong incentives for people to get out more debt. And this holds to such a degree that we will be in the same position we are now in 10 years. So debt will return to the level it is now within a decade. That's CRF B22. In addition, the policy is just unfair. Many Americans will see the plan as deeply unfair. Great quote from Davis and Harrigan 21. Quote, expect many taxpayers to cry foul. Homeowners will quite sensibly wonder why the government is not forgiving their mortgages. If relieving students from the burden of their debts is a good idea, it should be an even better idea to relieve homeowners of theirs. What about students who worked multiple jobs or attended less prestigious universities so they could avoid going into debt? What about students who diligently paid off their debt and are now debt-free? What about people in the trades? Is it reasonable to charge people via the higher taxes loan forgiveness will bring, who did not go to college to subsidize those who do? Again, Davies and Harrington 21. And lastly, accountability. So forgiving all the student debt just sends the wrong message, that there need be no accountability for your financial decisions even if they're really poor. Quote from Cohen 22, this approach does nothing to draw us together as a nation. Instead, it will drive us further apart and seemingly make fools of us who play by the rules. All right, so those are the negative incentives. Lastly, for neg, status quo solves. Jacobson 722 says that $3,000 per borrower has already been forgiven on average through COVID-era interest suspension. And then again with the SAVE plan, it's really bad timing for this resolution, for the HAF team anyway. The SAVE plan has already forgiven student loans for 800,000 people, and millions more are now eligible for income-driven repayment. So we already have plans in place to take care of this. Both of these policies, by the way, are more conservative, more reasonable, more targeted, that actually help people who need it and not just doctors and lawyers, and a blanket forgiveness loan, as is proposed by the Affirmative, will disrupt this status quo. Okay, that is it for your lecture. I am thrilled that I'm getting this lecture out way quicker than normal. I would like to thank a great student, Sophia, who helped me do research to help this get out quicker. A little bio of her in the brief. But because it's coming out much quicker, and because I always suspect that the resolution will change, I've already noted a couple ways I think it might change if the wording committee decides to do that, by adding the word undergraduate to it, or by dealing with this save plan somehow. Otherwise, sorry, Aff, hopefully you get an egg in your rounds. Enjoy the topic. Remember, again, that all evidence mentioned in this video and much more not mentioned in the video is available at debatetrack.com. Thank you for watching. I appreciate all of you very, very deeply. Leave a comment if you liked it, and remember to be kind to yourself and be kind to those around you. See you next time for the January topic. Bye-bye.